Okay, hello and welcome to my channel. This is my first video on this channel and I wanted to talk about my autistic burnout story. I thought that would be a good intro to me here, and I want to talk about my burnout story and then also basically what led to my diagnosis of being autistic. I do want to provide a disclaimer that I am currently in burnout. I am still recovering from burnout. I'm a lot better today than where I was and how I started, but I do want to give you that disclaimer mostly because I am in burnout, I am unmasked, and so I am kind of rediscovering myself and who I am. And that means that I am a lot less put together than I may have been in the past. I might ramble in this video, I might go off on a tangent, I might stim, I might whatever. So I just want to give you that disclaimer before we get started that I'm going to be a little bit all over the place, and also that this video is probably going to be long. So bear with me with it. Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm also going to be wearing these glasses. They are FL41 glasses, which are basically like this rose-colored glasses. They have been really helpful for me with migraines and light sensitivity. That got really bad during my burnout. So thank you for letting me wear my groovy glasses in this video as well. I want to share my story as a woman who was late diagnosed at 31 years old with autism and ADHD. I was diagnosed first with ADHD at 29 and then subsequently autism at 31. My dog had some things to say about that. I do want to give a disclaimer in this video that I will be talking about some sensitive topics, including trauma and self-harm, depression, suicidal ideation. So just so you know, I want to just touch on that. My channel is called Rewilding Clee, and Clee is a nickname that I have given my inner child. It's a long story, but I had this nickname of Cletus when I first started dating my partner, and it kind of just stuck over the years, and then it somehow morphed into my inner child between me and my partner, baby Clee and Clee, Queen Clee. So Rewilding Clee is truly, for me, speaks on having my inner child come back out and have her be her true self. It sounded very cheesy, but it is true that I've heard a lot of people say that when they are diagnosed with autism, that feels like you are getting to know yourself again for the first time, and that you've always known who you are the entire time, and that you don't really know who you are because you've been like kind of living another person. So rewilding Clee is letting her be wild and free again. And also, I just love wildflowers. I don't like really manicured gardens. I actually really like wildflowers and sunflowers and all of that. So rewilding just kind of reminded me of that as well. So that's the name of my channel. My name is Candace, so you can call me whatever. Clee, Candace. Hi, weirdo. So yeah, my hope with this video is that as I share my story, that other people who are maybe in burnout or don't know that they're in burnout or are suspecting that they're autistic or AuDHD, my hope is that as I share my story, that other people will feel less alone as well, and hopefully maybe find research on their own because they relate to my story. The reason why I was diagnosed, self-diagnosed, and then subsequently professionally diagnosed is because of somebody who made a video on AuDHD. I really wish that I remembered who it was. I watched it on afterward, but that one video that kind of cracked the door open for me to go, oh, that sounds weirdly familiar. Let me research more into this. So my hope is that I can help other people feel less alone and hopefully suffer for less amount of time. suffer less and know why they're suffering in the first place. So yeah, that is my kind of hope with this. I'm going to speak in this video about what led to my burnout. I'm going to speak on that briefly, and then my relationship to my autism and ADHD prior to burnout, like unknowingly, and then my hindsight reflections. I'm also going to share my diagnosis and then my healing journey so far and relearning like who I really am, even though I've always known I'm that person all along. So I want to start with my relationship to my autistic and ADHD self prior to being diagnosed, and I guess a little bit of brief story on like my childhood. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I do want to make another video like going more in depth on my childhood and growing up with ADHD unknowingly. So that's where I'm going to start. So I'm going to give a brief story on this, a brief summary. I was never diagnosed with autism or ADHD officially in my childhood. ADHD is kind of, again, as we know now, there's a lot of autism and ADHD genetics. So there was always the joke in the family that like we're all ADHD. There was never any sort of like autism. There are some family members that in hindsight now are very autistic, but in the moment or in my childhood, it was like, oh, that's kind of like the autistic. He's sort of autistic is like the phrasing that people would use. And it was only really directed toward male relatives, never really female. Female, it was like anxiety, depression, agitated depression. I have other mental health stuff that goes on, that is in my family, like bipolar. It's like genuine bipolar, not just like misdiagnosed autism. I know that's a misdiagnosis as well, but like there's genuinely some bipolar that goes in my family. And so it's always been kind of a little bit of a mystery, but I myself was never diagnosed with autism or ADHD officially. I am also 31 years old, which means that I was born in 1994, which means I was a child of the 2000s. So I was growing up in the 2000s. And contextually, I think what's interesting about this kind of cohort of people that are being late diagnosed, especially women a lot, and especially firstborn children. So I'm a firstborn child and the firstborn daughter of my family, which adds another nuance to it. In the 2000s, autism was pretty much only level 2 was recognized. Level 1, like there wasn't the levels, first of all. It was Asperger's and then just autism. And so autism, from what I remember, was only boys. I was always told it was only boys, and it was basically only level 2 plus boys, like what we would call level 2 and level 3 boys. They were really interested in math and science, and they were good at it, and I was not good at math. And there was sort of this like savant thing, like you had to be really good at something. And then ADHD was hyperactive, was the only thing that was recognized, and there was only hyperactive boys that were really being diagnosed. And this was the heavy like 2000s medication time. So I just didn't think that I could have autism or ADHD. As far as my ADHD, when I was little, I was super ADHD in the sense that I stimmed a lot, vocal stimmed. I was physically a lot. I was very hyper as a child at home, but in class, I daydreamed. So I would get called on and, all that, and not know what the question was because I was in my own little like world. I would run around with a bucket on my head going whoa, like vocally stimming all over the place. So yeah, I had a lot of that. From a very young age, I had sensory overwhelm by a lot of things. My main ones were sounds, bright lights, and clothing. So I've always been sensitive to light, going out without sunglasses, the dentist office, etc. Sounds, I've always had a phobia of balloons popping and fireworks, and also just loud sounds in general. Clothing, I was always really sensitive to things on my skin and materials. And then also smell was a huge one. I get migraines from smells. I was never able to use, still can't use traditional dryer sheets. They have to be unscented. So those were like my main challenges. And it was really intense when I would have the sensory overwhelm because I could be in a classroom and I was expected to be in that classroom, but like I felt like one sensory issue was going to make me just go into a whole attack. And by attack, I mean meltdown or a shutdown or just having a migraine, a physical detrimental experience. I had a really hard time with social situations. I had a really hard time with friends. I was bullied. This was throughout school from beginning to end. I was too shy, too sensitive. I had a lot of social anxiety because people just treated me differently. So I really struggled in school. I really struggled in social situations. I wasn't really actively involved in social situations. And it was very difficult for me to connect with others, especially neurotypicals. The thing is, too, when you're masking, or when I was masking, it was difficult for me to like connect with other kids that were probably autistic because I was trying to hide that part of myself because that part of myself was punished by family, by teachers, by peers. It was actively punished. So people that I may have connected better with, I couldn't socialize with because I felt like that was going to hurt me. And it would hurt me if I did. One additional aspect to my childhood is that I had a very traumatic childhood. I also have chronic body stuff from that as well. So, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue. I have metabolic stuff. That's not really, I think it's more genetic, but I just have a lot of like hypermobility, like not that that's all related to trauma, but I also have chronic illnesses. So I think that's also another part that is just good to know for my story. The biggest thing that happened was in school, I learned that I had to ignore my needs and cover up my discomfort or I would be punished or outcasted. So I did really well in school. This also was related to my childhood trauma. Because of the nature of my childhood, I had to do really well in school for custody reasons and for court reporting reasons. So I learned really, really well how to mask in order to do well as a student. So, not necessarily in social situations with other peers, but I learned how to be a really good student and to get along with teachers. I did really well in writing and English, and I was placed in gifted gate classes. And then in high school, I really started to struggle with the social aspect of school. So I actually ended up leaving in my junior year for independent study just because of my anxiety, my depression, and the bullying. In my early 20s, I had a really bad depression episode. And so I ended up officially kind of going to therapy and I got diagnosed with social anxiety. And this is when I first started my antidepressant meds. So I was 19 going on 20 when I started doing that. And I started doing intensive exposure therapy and CBT to learn how to put myself into social situations. I was like mute growing up as a kid in certain situations. I couldn't do phone calls, I couldn't do emails, I couldn't really connect even just to take care of myself. So once I turned 18, none of the doctors wanted to talk to my mom. I relied heavily on my mom growing up for that. So I had to learn how to do social stuff. And so this is when I started learning how to mask. I really saw results with this. I would learn how to be a certain person in order to get people to like me in social situations. And I loved it. I loved the way it felt. I was like, finally, I know what's wrong with me. It's social anxiety. I just need to like get out there and expose myself more to the world. And I just felt really good doing that. However, after college, I started to really struggle because I couldn't really fit into the work social environments and the work hierarchies. I saw that the rules for school and the rules for work were way different, and I just couldn't. It was really difficult for me to manage that. And also, just like what I know now is like the executive dysfunction of like having to get up, go to work all day long. I'm exhausted when I get home. My chronic illnesses are flaring up, all that, and I really just could not work full time ever. I still can't. I struggle with working. Struggle with working full time jobs in particular. The injustices of the corporate environments. I worked in HR for a while, and it was just really hard for me to do that. So that's a little bit of context of me before my burnout. My burnout started pretty much the road to burnout was in August of 2021. This is when I moved from my hometown. Me and my partner, we moved down to Los Angeles. So from August 2021 to March of 2025 was when I was in heavy burnout. This was the precursor. This was the buildup of all my burnout. I wasn't aware I was in burnout, but I was definitely building myself up for burnout. And I want to talk about what led to this. And I think this is important because I wish looking back that I had known that I was autistic, because I never would have put myself into a lot of these situations, or I would have heavily accommodated for these situations. And I think that's the biggest message that I want to send, is that if you suspect that you're autistic, I mean, it's hard because so many of us end up burnt out and then lead to our diagnoses. So it's difficult, but if if you're able to, it's really helpful. So the TLDR version of this is that I had too much pressure and stress from both external events that were happening in my life that I could not control, and internal pressures that I was putting on myself, and kind of external pressures that I intentionally put on myself as well. I was doing way too much. I was doing way too many things. I was living in a sensory, overwhelming environment, which was Los Angeles. I felt trapped in the city, but I wasn't leaving my situation. I was disconnected from nature, which was part of living in an urban environment. And I saw a lot of injustices in just my life circumstances, and also just living in LA. In LA, you can see the wealth divide really heavily. And so I was really struggling with seeing massive amounts of wealth literally across the street from people who were houseless. Like, it was just really, really sad, and really, really hard to see. I had several meltdowns and crying episodes from it. So the start of the burnout was moving to LA. There were several life events that happened within a span of a couple months that were really intense. Things like health scares. We lost both of our cars in the same month. We had a stressful landlord. He was kind of like a slumlord. I was working full time, and I was volunteering at a horse rescue that was 45 minutes one way on the 405, which is, if you don't know LA, it is a very intense freeway, and there's a lot of road rage that happens on that. And I've seen so many traumatic things. I've seen, just driving on the freeway, like, I saw a motorcyclist fly off of his bike and fly across the freeway. I've seen cars on fire. I've seen people bleeding out. Like, the amount of intensity that I saw just driving on that freeway was like enough to send somebody into like trauma or panic. I had a very traumatic internship at a horse ranch as I entered going into working with horses. We moved down there in a very stressful way. It was 2 weeks that we needed to move down there. It was for a Hollywood internship. Long story, it ended up falling apart. And so we were stuck down there. We didn't have anyone that was down there. The situation with the internship was through family, so it led to some family estrangement. I ended up buying a horse, which was one of my lifelong dreams, but it was the wrong horse. And I was working with a trainer that was leading me down the wrong path. I decided in the middle of that to get certified in equine body work, which was a very intense 2-year program. That burnt me out a lot. My horse ended up having major health and behavioral issues. She actually ended up at a sanctuary because of the issues that she had. I had a fallout with the trainer and mentor around this horse. I was diagnosed with more chronic illness stuff like PCOS or PMOS now. I was seeing the wealth divide constantly on a daily basis. And this all kind of culminated into me being attacked by a mountain lion at the barn when I was with my horse, and I almost died. And that was like my wake-up call to leave LA. So in January of 2025, we decided to leave LA. Unfortunately, January 2025 was also the fires that it broke out. So we were 5 minutes from the Palisades fire. So for the entire month of January, we were also under like evacuation warning. My horse was also under it in a different area for a different fire. So there was just a lot that basically, like, I think a neurotypical would have lost it. But I really lost it, and it was too much on my nervous system, way too stacked, one on top of the other. I mean, this was 3 years, and it was so much stuff that happened. So I just pushed myself too far. Some of these things were obviously my choice. I think masking felt really good. It felt really good to be able to work full time remotely and then go to a horse rescue and then come home and be working from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. every morning, or every day, because that felt good. It felt like I was peak. I was successful. I felt like I was being like girl boss hustling kind of thing. And that pushed me way too far and pushed me over the edge. My first like warning sign of burnout was that I started to feel extremely overwhelmed and agitated constantly. I had serious road rage that was starting to go on. I was unmotivated for any of the things that I had previously enjoyed. I didn't want to go to the horses anymore. I didn't want to go work with my horse when I owned her. I just always felt like there was overwhelm and agitation. I always felt like I was on edge, and I slept horribly during this time. I had zero restfulness when I was sleeping. I would wake up exhausted, I would go to sleep exhausted. And I started to have panic attacks, and I started to get afraid of leaving the house. I actually told my therapist at one point that I felt like I had agoraphobia. That resolved itself once I moved to Portland area. I'm in Portland, Oregon now. I started going into self-harm. I started going into rage, and I just hated everything. I hated the world. I hated everyone around me. I didn't want to do anything. I had massive PDA, which is I think it's pathological demand avoidance. I resented anyone that gave me any sort of demand. And it could be a small demand. It could be something that I knew I needed to do, and I hated them. Like I felt the rage of having to have that put on me. And this is when I went to the doctor for my fibromyalgia and my ADHD. And I started to get put on medications for both fibromyalgia and for my ADHD. And that wasn't helping. And once I reached the breaking point with the mountain lion and I knew that we had to move out of LA, I thought it was just LA. I thought LA was what was driving me crazy. It was a huge part of it. I think it was a huge part of my sensory overwhelm. I think having to drive on the freeway every single day, my horse had an injury at one point where I was driving every single day on the 405, and like 35 minutes on the 405 without traffic. It would be 2 hours if there was traffic. So I had to time out my day. It just like my whole life revolved around this horse. And my partner and I, we had moved down to LA to do film and acting. And as we know now, Hollywood has really dropped off as far as production goes. And we're both interested in production. There's not a lot filming in LA anymore. There was actually, I remember driving on the 405 to Santa Clarita and seeing a lot of like production vans and trucks going by. And there was like nothing by the time that we left. I thought I was in burnout from the city. So I told my partner, I was like, I have to get out of LA. And he was like, okay, let's do it. And we decided to move to Portland, Oregon. We had visited Portland before and we loved it. We loved the city. We loved the grass, the greenery, the trees, the nature culture, just kind of that more down to earth vibe. After the fires ended, we visited and then ended up moving to Portland while I was in full burnout. That was hard, but I knew that I needed to push through because I had to get out of the city. It was like survival for me at that point. So now we're at March of 2025. This is life after LA. So this is once we've reached Portland. I thought that once we moved here that I would just light back up and feel a lot better. And yes, don't get me wrong, I felt a ton of relief moving here, but I did not feel the energy, the motivation. I did not feel any of that get better. Instead, I actually fell apart physically and mentally. So I had so much less anxiety and stimulation, but I felt like all my energy was depleted. I had massive fibro flares, bedridden fibro flares. I had tailbone and hip flexor fibro flares. It's kind of like my hot spot, but it really went really bad. I was bedridden for like 10 days at a time sometimes. I got my very first ever like massive eczema flare, which is like, it's like 95% healed now. But I mean, I had my whole hand was just open wound kind of thing. At this point, I still had my horse, so I was still having problems with her. I had hauled her up here with me. So physically, mentally, she was having issues, and I still had to go to the barn several times a week to take care of her, even though I wasn't really getting very much done with her. I kind of toward the end just let her be in the pasture. My sister was getting married, so I had to travel down to California still. We still had stuff in storage. So there were still things that I had to do throughout 2025. And then summer of 2025 was when I learned about AuDHD from TikTok. I watched a TikTok and I was like, AuDHD, like what is AuDHD? I knew ADHD, so I knew there was ADHD somewhere involved in that. I don't know. I knew I had ADHD, so I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, what's the awe? What's the awe part of that? And then I realized and discovered that it's autism with ADHD. And I was like, no way, no way. Because I majored in psychology, in college, and I remember everyone saying throughout my childhood and even into college that you cannot have autism and ADHD together. They are mutually exclusive things. So I was like, well, I'm definitely ADHD. Like, I know that about myself. So I can't have autism. And when they said that you can, I was like, okay. So then I started researching it, and it was like the glove fit. Like, it was like for the first time in my life, I knew what I was, like what my brain was, and it was ADHD, and I just knew it. Like the feeling in my stomach, I just immediately related to it. And so even though I related so much to this ADHD stuff, I was still unsure if I really had it, because I was just always told, like, just all of my beliefs about autism were that I couldn't have this. And so I wasn't sure if I was just having ADHD overwhelm or if it was autistic overwhelm as well, and autistic burnout. Even though I related to like all of the questions and it answered so many questions that I had about myself and about my burnout and the previous like 4 years that all of this stuff had been going on. Because I was having so many issues with my body and my mind at this point, I knew that I had to rehome my horse. I knew that I had to rehome her because of her trauma. I had to rehome her to some sort of sanctuary type environment. So in November of 2025, that's when I rehomed my horse to a sanctuary. I had attended my sister's wedding in August, and I was finally at this point, I felt like I could really rest. So November of 2025 was when I like, okay, now I can fall apart. I removed so many commitments to myself that I had, that I was able to finally like rest. So after I did that, I decided that I wanted to get formally diagnosed. And I have mixed feelings about this. My intention with getting formally diagnosed was mostly for my family, because they're not, my family was not believing that I was autistic, even though I had said, and there was a lot of talk of like, well, why are you labeling yourself? And I think it's interesting because like you get labeled. Like I got so labeled growing up as an undiagnosed autistic person that were harmful labels. And then as soon as I want to have a label of what I really am, and what it would explain, a lot of the things I was going through. Well, now it's like, well, why are we using labels? And so I got really frustrated by that. And that's why I wanted to get formally diagnosed. By the time I ended up getting diagnosed, I've actually got no contact with my family right now. And so it didn't even really matter. So that's why I kind of have mixed feelings about it for myself. I think if you want to get formally diagnosed, go for it. I recognize that there are huge barriers to getting formally diagnosed. I completely 100% recognize self-diagnosis. I think just for me, I just felt like I was being so gaslit by my family that I just needed to know by a professional if I was autistic for real, or if I was just like making a big deal out of nothing. So in January of 2025, I started the process. I did a ton of interviews, a ton of surveys. My partner was interviewed, and I was officially diagnosed with level 1 autism and ADHD. I'm going to do another video of my diagnosis process, because I want to kind of go a little bit more in depth of that. And I know this video is already probably way too long. That was when I was officially diagnosed, and it was so relieving. And the kind of common thread and feeling and way that I describe it, and that I've heard other people describe it, is that there is this massive amount of grief and relief that you get, because so many of the accommodations that people with autism and ADHD need are so simple and easy to implement. I recognize that there are others that are not, and that for level 2 and 3, I recognize that there are more higher support needs with that. However, for me and my personal story, it felt like, why? Like, why was I just told to suffer? Why was I just so, like, everyone was just hell bent on me just like fitting in? And I got really angry. And so there's this grief and there's this relief, and I'll make some more videos on that as well, around being autistic and finally being like, okay, finally, like, I'm not messed up, I'm not, just a freak. I feel like I belong to a group. Finally, I wasn't defective, I was autistic. Like, okay, cool. Now I know what to do. Now I know how to accommodate myself. Now I know how to advocate for myself. The empowerment that I got was massive. Post diagnosis, this is kind of January 2026 to current, which is when I'm filming this, which is June. I'm relearning who I am versus what the mask was slash is. I recognize that I need to mask in certain situations. Not everyone is safe out there in the world. Not everyone understands autism in the world. And so but I know when I'm doing it. So it's way less draining when I mask. I'm not masking to validate myself. I'm masking to protect myself at this point. At home, I'm unmasked. Around my partner, I'm unmasked. I'm allowing my autism and my ADHD to shine through more without grief and without shame. Grief in the sense of like giving myself grief. There is still grief, obviously, in the process, but I'm allowing myself to be who I am a lot more. And it feels so good that like little inner child is so happy now that she can just be herself. The things that I still struggle with, and that were kind of signs I was going into burnout, and that I've really struggled with over the past year, and that I've honestly like skill regressed in, are work. I cannot mask at work anymore. Obviously, that brings challenges. Work environments, I'm honestly at the point where I'm just self-disclosing because I can't go back to masking like super hardcore. I'm not working right now, mostly because of that, or in a traditional environment. I've been pet sitting a lot more. I really struggle with household tasks. I think this is probably my biggest challenge, especially dishes, laundry, clutter, just that like continuous buildup, and like, oh, they never end. Dishes never end, laundry never ends. I tried to do pet sitting, like, I started to feel myself trying to do it like quote unquote full time, but the context switching was really difficult. So I've paused my pet sitting for the month of June. I'm going to be doing it much more part time. Another thing I really struggle with is emotional regulation. So this is probably one of my biggest ones as far as like skill regression. Luckily, I can still drive, which I'm so grateful for because I've always been a big driver. I don't know how I'm still able to drive because of my experience driving in LA, but I am. So I'm grateful for that. But I do take public transportation when I can, or when I feel like it's going to be a situation where it's going to be too overwhelming to find parking. I allow myself to just take the bus and the train. And I love that Portland has a very extensive compared to LA. It has a much easier time of just riding transport. With emotional regulation, I have a lot of meltdowns, especially in regard to trying to keep up with stuff like housework. I have recently been treating myself like I have a traumatic brain injury, and I've heard that a lot of people talk about this about autistic burnout, that you basically have to treat yourself like you have a traumatic brain injury or like a massive, you know, illness. It is something that is very serious. It is an injury. It is an injury to like the nervous system, basically. And so now I know that I have to stay under threshold for my autism and my ADHD. I always knew that I had to stay under threshold for fibromyalgia. I've had fibromyalgia my whole life. I've had chronic illness my whole life, but I never thought about my nervous system, my autism, because I just didn't know. And so now I have had to really change my relationship to rest and allow myself to rest. Like I've been saying, I'm on summer vacation this summer. I've been saying that I am, on sabbatical. Like I've been really trying to allow myself to rest without that shame and without that kind of capitalist corporate speak of I need to be a productive member of society and adult and blah blah blah, all that jargon. I've been taking in a ton of stories of autistic folks, and it's been so healing, whether that is in content online, blogs, videos, TikToks. I've been reading books, I've been reading memoirs, I've been reading so much stuff to learn about myself and about other people's experiences, especially high masking, late diagnosed folks, especially women for me. And I've been attending a lot of groups and trying to socialize more with people who are neurodivergent because I feel so much more at home around those folks than I do around neurotypicals. One of the ways that I've described it is that I feel like I am from like a different country. I feel like I speak neurotypical as a high masking, autistic person. I speak neurotypical not well. I make grammar mistakes, I make vocab mistakes. I, can get by a little bit. And I have been able to get by in the past with speaking neurotypical, but it's not my first language. It is my second language, and I struggle with it. And I struggle with the cultural differences, the quote unquote cultural differences of neurotypical culture. And sometimes I boof it and I mess up and, whatever. And when I'm around or the neurodivergent folks, it's like I'm speaking my native language. And it's like I'm in my native culture. And that's the best way I can describe it, is that I feel like I'm constantly speaking a different language that I had to learn as throughout my life. And now I can, when I'm interacting with neurodivergent folks, I just feel so much more natural and at home. And so I've been really trying to kind of feed that part of my soul and my nervous system and just my mind, honestly. I've been doing a lot of parts work. If you are not familiar with internal family systems, I highly recommend looking it up and reading the book. The book that is like not the clinical one, but the more layman's terms of it is called No Bad Parts. Richard Schwartz. I have it right down there. He's the man who kind of is at the helm of it. I highly recommend it because I've been doing a lot of parts work and it's been very helpful, especially in regard to like the different versions of myself, the different mask versions, the different true versions, the inner child work. So I've been doing a lot of that work. I have an AuDHD therapist, and I really, again, this is another high recommendation for me. I've been through therapy my whole life. Like my whole life I've been in therapy, and I never really clicked until I got to another neurodivergent therapist, because they know what my brain is. They know why I'm struggling with certain things. My therapist, she doesn't give me advice about the dishes that is for neurotypicals or that I'm going to try out and fail at, because it's just like, it's not about motivation. Sometimes I can't stand the smell of dirty dishes. I can't stand the feeling of water on my hands when I'm doing dishes. Sometimes it's sensory overwhelm. And a lot of neurotypical therapists just did not understand that. And so I think that's another high recommendation that I have, and that has been so helpful. I reduced my commitments to only the essential commitments. I have a smaller life now. I have a really small world right now, and that's okay. I accept that. I have let go of some dreams of mine. For right now, I have let go of other dreams that I just know I never think I will get to, especially post diagnosis and post burnout. And I'm accepting those. It's hard. There's grief, there's frustration with that, but I am accepting it now. And I know why I'm letting them go, because I had to. I have to. Yeah. So I want to wrap this video up. I'm sure it's way too long, but I just want to say that right now, my burnout is ongoing. This channel is going to be messy. I'm not going to be really like cleaned up. Hey, here's how I solved this, how I resolved, my burnout. I'm very much actively in burnout right now. I am discovering who I am at 31 years old, which is so weird to say. But I feel like I finally understand who I am now. And I feel like I no longer need to look for who I am now. And I know there's always going to be discovering, nuances of myself, but I don't feel that desire, that hole in my life, that hole in my soul of like, why isn't this working? Like, I know why things aren't going to work now. I know what I need to do to accommodate myself. I know certain situations that are probably not going to work for me. And so that feels much better. I think now, for the first time in a long time, I feel hopeful for the future, and I feel hopeful for a realistic future of myself. instead of kind of this masked pretend version of myself. I have good and bad days. I have good and bad moments. I have meltdowns, and then I have joy. And I'm just kind of allowing myself to be a mess right now, which is untangling a massive part of me that was perfectionistic for so long and image based for so long, honestly. I'm allowing myself to ask for help, ask for accommodations. I'm allowing myself to bring accommodations, to be seen out in public with accommodations instead of hiding. And this goes for my fibromyalgia, my pain. I have tailbone pain. I bring my little tailbone cushion with me wherever I go. I bring my headphones with me. I wear these out in public. I don't care anymore, honestly. I am going to be comfortable in my world. I'm going to be comfortable in my skin, and I'm not going to be ashamed of it anymore. So my hope with this channel is to share my journey and to connect with fellow autistic and ADHD folks and AuDHD folks, help other people that are on their journey as well. I'm going to be very gentle with myself with this project. This is not really a deadline heavy, once a week, gotta do this thing kind of thing. This is just going to be, as I'm navigating my journey, I'll share things and connect with folks. And I have a TikTok. It's the same username, Rewilding Clee. You can go on my TikTok if you want. I kind of just share little doodads on there. I'd say a lot of ADHD stims and nonsense on there. I hope to start a Substack sometime. I have dreams of doing a podcast and coaching others with AuDHD, maybe doing groups, support groups. Again, that's my kind of hustle brain, but it's going to be on my timeline. And yeah, for right now, it's just going to be sharing my story and hoping that what I share helps others. And honestly, I just heal from this too. I heal from being able to speak and just say my story. So yeah, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for hearing my story. I really appreciate it. I would love to hear your story and connect with you as well. If you would like to share your story in the comments, or if you want to reach out on TikTok or message or whatever, and share your story, I'd love to hear your story too. I think one of the things about being autistic and ADHD and AuDHD and neurodivergent, and you can feel really lonely, or I can feel really lonely, and I've heard a lot of folks say that they can feel lonely. And it feels lonely when you're masking and you are around neurotypicals and you don't feel like yourself, but you're trying to pretend to be something they want to see. It's lonely. And so one of the biggest things that I hope is that we can connect with each other and finally feel together and like we matter. I hope you have a good enough day today, and I will see you in my next video.